Before I get started, I'd like to invite you to start with a prayer in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, Holy Spirit, to guide me, to help bring forth the truth, and that my story may shed some light for someone who is in the darkness still suffering, that the pain that they feel can somehow be relieved, that the hand of AA is out for them, and I'm here to have that hand be outstretched. That's my responsibility. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I'm willing to get, down and dirty and real and honest. And I pray for your guidance during all of this. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Great prayer, and it's a terrific way to start. Good afternoon, John Hawley from Seals and Recovery. I believe this is podcast number 7. I'm still an alcoholic. Joining me today is another retired SEAL who has a phenomenal story, who has an incredible recovery program. And one thing I love about Gordon being part of our group is no matter how our meetings are going in Seals and Recovery, he always brings a smile to our faces and change the mood of our meetings more towards a gratification meeting. Gordon always brings a smile to everybody's face, and I welcome him aboard. And he's been with us. How long, Gordon? When did you join SEALs and Recovery?
It's been about a year. I saw the advertisement in the blast and reached out, and I believe it was you that responded to me. And I ended up actually headed down to Norfolk, Virginia, and then found out that that's where the meeting was. And I joined it online, and then I met with Doug and yourself at a coffee shop, and we had a good long conversation.
So for those who don't know what the blast is, I think the blast comes out bi-quarterly, I believe, every 2 months.
Good question. Don't know.
It's a publication for folks who belong to the UDT SEAL Association, and you get it. It's a nice glossy thing with a bunch of ads, but we finally got Seals and Recovery, our shtick in there. So our names and our numbers available. Let's start off with, as I always do in these podcasts, Gordon, just some like one-on-one baseline stuff. Where you grew up, how you grew up, your family atmosphere, your brothers, sisters. How was school for you? Did you play some sports, your activities? What attracted you to the Navy and eventually the Navy SEALs?
Awesome. The first thing I kind of need to address is I need to make a correction. I was a Navy SEAL. I did not retire. I got out in 1996. And part of the reason for that is I came back off a deployment. I went into Danny's Palm Bar and Grill, and in the long, dark, anyone who's been there knows that it's kind of a long, dark bar. And in the back corner in one of the booths, I saw this girl and I saw her smile, and I said, man, I have got to meet that girl. So I did what any teen guy would do. I walked back and climbed over the table to sit next to her. And she ultimately became my wife. She has 3 uncles who are all SEALs. So she didn't have any illusions about, the SEAL teams and what we did. And so as our courtship continued and I ultimately proposed to her, it came down to a decision between a family with the teams or a family with her. And I did choose a family with her and leave the teams in 1996.
So what was your tenure in teams? How long? And what was your class number?
My class was 180, and I graduated in 1992 in the spring. I had a winter class when they still did that. I remember doing the 5-mile ocean swim in January.
Down at Steel Pier. Well, not Steel Pier. The ocean. What the pier down at the end in Pebble Beach, right?
Down to no, we swam halfway down and back. So for the 5
Okay. Miles. Oh yeah, I got you.
And the current was going against us both ways. I'm sure of that. Mm-hmm. And then I was at SEAL Team 1 from 1992 until 1996 when I got out.
So what's interesting is he referenced Danny's bar. So there's a couple iconic bars in Coronado, and we all know what there's. McPee's, Danny's, and back in the old days, Mexican Village, and then breakfast down at Jalisco's. So he met his wife at an iconic SEAL bar, Danny's, with Danny's Burger, the Hurricane Burger. I don't even know what they call it.
Slam Burger.
Yeah, so it's still there. And Night and Day Cafe has seating, like a person out in front where you have to almost have reservation. It's something I don't recognize when I went out there.
Crazy. Yeah. So now, to back up and give you some of my story, in my childhood, my early childhood till I was about 7, I lived in Vermont. My father died when I was 6.5. He committed suicide in our house, and that left my mother as a single mother in the early 70s, at a time when it was extremely difficult to be a single mother, and in Vermont where there was no work available. And so at a pretty young age, I was uprooted from my family home, she like literally. I didn't know it was going to happen. She sent me to a month-long summer camp, and I was too young to be there. But my aunt was one of the instructors at the camp, so they made a waiver, and I got to go to this camp that I really didn't fit in. And when I came home to an entirely different state. We were in a condo, not a house, and my mom had given our dog away, and I was hugely resentful about all that. I look back at it now and I go, my word, the challenges that she had to overcome were incredible. But as that young child, and with a very self-centered point of view, I was very angry. It made me very, very angry. And then going, knocking around through a couple different schools, it seemed like I went to a different school every year. Sometimes I made it a half a year and went to a different school.
Were you angry? This is very interesting to me, because a lot of the stuff that we've manifested later in life has to do with what happened early in life. Those are the traumas that really affect us. Mm-hmm. You actually can remember at a young age being that angry?
Oh, furious. Yeah. Wow. I was blind with anger.
Because I glazed over a lot of shit and just buried it myself and came out later in life.
Yeah. And my anger was primarily directed towards my mother. So our relationship really deteriorated. And, at the same time, my mother was trying to find a husband. And so there was a revolving door of men going through the house. And I remember just desperately wanting to have a father in my life, some kind of a father figure. And no one was ever really around long enough to assume that role. And then, my mom ultimately did find a guy that she was dating consistently for, 3 years or so. And we ended up moving in with him. And, my mom also was at any opportunity trying to find a place to get me out of the house, to get me, and the way I saw it is to get me out of the way so she could be finding the next man. Right. So I was always being pushed off onto something or someone else or somewhere else. And, that left me, not having any like core group of childhood friends. Like I don't have contact with anybody from my childhood that I grew up with. That just didn't happen. We didn't have those kinds of connections. But this guy that my mom, so we moved to Boston and we lived in a condo there, and his parents had a beautiful home on Cape Cod. And I remember spending a couple summers down on Cape Cod. Of course, she sent me there and I was staying with his grandparents. He had 2 kids from another marriage who would come up halfway through the summer. So a lot of the times I was alone there. And this was a beautiful home right on the water, a 4-car detached garage, very wealthy family. And I remember going through that garage and I found like a 12 or 14 foot flat bottom skiff. And I came tearing out of that place. I'm like, there's a boat. There's a boat in the garage. And they were like, oh yeah, that's the Susie Q, named after the plane that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. Right. And it's wooden and it's been in there for so long, it'll never float. And I said, what do I have to do to get it to float? And so I dragged that thing out. I ground all the caulk out of it, recaulked it, repainted it, dragged it down to the water, put it in the water. And of course it sank immediately, but it's because it was an old wooden boat. The wood had to swell. And after a day of that boat being on the bottom, I raised it up and I had a boat and I'm rowing it. And there was an old Evinrude 2.5 horsepower motor that I must have pulled 1,000 times and got it to start once. But
did it actually have the recoil, or did it have to spin it on there and pull it and wrap it up every time?
Yeah, no, it did have the recoil.
Gotcha.
My mom's boyfriend at the time made a deal with me that if I could make enough money for half of a new motor, he would pitch in for the other half. So I got the lawnmower out and I was that kid going around knocking on people's doors. Hey, can I mow your lawn? Hey, can I mow your lawn? And I mowed lawns every day to make enough money. And I did. And I got that 2.5 horsepower Evinrude motor. And as far as I was concerned, I was the admiral. I felt like a king on the water. It was amazing. And I took that boat everywhere and had all kinds of adventures and misadventures and running out of gas.
Mm.
It's just, I loved being on the water. And that in a way that goes back to that first condominium we lived in Massachusetts was in Marblehead, and the summer camp there was a YMCA summer camp, and it was a sailing camp. And so I would in the morning get sent off, with a bagged lunch and a life jacket and take the ferry out to what was called Children's Island. And we would sail all day, every day. So I had this history of sailing, and then I found this boat. So I had a relationship with the ocean that started at a very young age. And I think
we're very similar, dude. I had no idea. So I grew up, my father didn't die. He was just a piece of shit. He used to beat the shit out of me and verbally and physically abuse me until my mother kicked him out. And my mother had to sustain a lifestyle too. It was very hard in the 70s. I'm 61. So, she cleaned houses, two a day and one on Saturdays. And I lived by the bay, and I was always about the water. When I was old enough to go clamming, I clammed for money. Yeah. Some guy, I used to take the ferry over to Fire Island. I used to tread clams. You put old socks are, tread the clams, and I used to sell them to a buyer. He goes, "You're pretty good at this. I'm going to give you a boat." It was a 16-foot Garvey with a 50 Merc on it with a tiller. And he goes, "Here's your boat. You go clam and sell me the clams." And from 9th or 10th grade on, I was immersed in my own adventures like you. I went everywhere. I did everything. I learned how to navigate with a compass. I learned how to, when it was foggy, to find the ferry's wake and follow it back home. But man, I feel you, man. That was my total freedom from a shit show going on at home.
Yeah. It was amazing. I was too young to harvest enough clams to sell them. But I was definitely a clam poacher. I used to go out with my bare feet and dig through the sand with my toes and find the clams that way and come back with, dinner basically.
Yeah.
But so that connection with the ocean started young.
And it's still your sanctuary. You're still working on the water. We'll get to that, but it's in your DNA.
Yeah, it is. It is. And so in keeping with my mom's sort of tradition of kind of finding someplace else to put me, in addition, our relationship was just deteriorating. And it went from bad to worse. And when I was 13, my mom convinced my grandfather to foot the bill, and I went to boarding school.
Which one?
It's a place called the Rectory down in Pomfret, Connecticut.
Nice. Rich kid boarding school.
I was so outclassed. I remember just not fitting in with anybody. And, probably the best example of that would be, it was a church-based school, but I didn't really learn anything about the church or God there. That came much later. It was in the early fall. We'd had our first snowstorm. We were coming back from church, and guys were throwing snowballs, and I picked up a snowball, and that's one thing I knew how to do since I grew up in Vermont. I could throw a snowball. And I hit this one kid, and he became enraged, and he picked up a block of ice and chased me. And I'm wearing these stupid fucking dress shoes that had no traction on them. And I'm running for my life at this point. And this guy, who was much bigger than me, right, was coming after me with this ice block. And I remember running down a flight of stairs, ducking underneath, and he threw that thing, and it whizzed past my head and smashed on the wall next to me. And I made it in, but that's about the best reception I got at that school. I definitely did not fit in. I did not have the background these kids had. I'd grown up in much, much slower. I didn't know the rock and roll bands that they knew. I didn't know how to play sports like they knew. Growing up without a dad, even baseball was not on my menu, right? And you had to take a sport. And so, because I wasn't really qualified to do any other sport, I ran cross country, because that's where everyone who couldn't do anything else ended up. And we had a terrible cross country team. But I ran cross country from 7th grade all the way through high school. And I actually credit that with teaching me and giving me some of the endurance to be able to push through pain, physical pain, because for anyone who loves to run, I'm sorry, but typically running can be very painful, especially if you're trying to go faster and faster. You've got to have the mental will and the discipline to push through that discomfort and that pain. And so I ran cross country, and I in the fall, and I ran track in the springtime. In the winter, I had a couple other different intervals with different sports, but none were ever very successful. So I got out. So that school went from 7th to 9th grade. And then I went to another preppy school in New Hampshire called Holderness. And I was there for about a year. And that's where kids, like there was drugs and alcohol all over that campus. And I was trying to fit in.
Was that your introduction to that?
To drugs and alcohol? No. I'll get into that in a minute, but at Holderness, I thought because the cool kids were all doing drugs and drinking, and I had never get my hands on any alcohol, I would try pot. And so I was trying to smoke pot to fit in and be cool with these kids. And I wasn't very good at that either. And it wasn't very many times into me trying to smoke pot where I got caught, right? And the irony is that the guy that I was smoking pot with, he was one of the biggest potheads in the school, and I wasn't. Like, I had smoked pot a handful of times trying to fit in, didn't really like it, and yet I got labeled as the kid who was the problem kid, and he essentially the next year got made a student leader, and I got kicked out of the school.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, pretty crazy. So from there, I went to another boarding school in Maine called Kent's Hill, which was the boarding school that you went to after you've been kicked out of a more respectable boarding school. So there were all kinds of kids there with problems, and I just decided that, I didn't want that aspect in my life anymore. The idea of trying to be the cool kid and misbehaving, I just moved away from that entirely. I'm like, no, I'm just going to be here. I'm going to study it to the best of I wasn't a great student because I didn't care enough to be a great student. There were classes where the teacher would inspire me and I would get an A, but another class I would get a D. And then, and then a month later I'd have an A in the class because there was a subject that interested me. And if you were to look at my reviews from all the teachers, the most consistent thing that was said about me is how inconsistent I was. But I didn't have a passion for education, and I didn't have, a driving goal. I didn't really know. I didn't come out of high school knowing what I was going to do when I grew up. And so making a decision on what college to go to, I wasn't well suited to do that. And I didn't have any advice in my life. I didn't have a counselor in my life that knew me, that could guide me. And I didn't get it from home. And I mean, the interesting thing is, backing up for a minute, that 7th grade year when I went to boarding school, there was one guy that, the guy whose parents I'd spent that time with, he dropped me off at the boarding school. And then at Thanksgiving, my mom's new guy, he picked me up. And then she married him in the spring. And, that was a difficult relationship. There were a lot of sort of psychological problems in that whole relationship. And it was a very controlling relationship. And it left me also somewhat emotionally scarred, and didn't do anything to ease any of that anger that I'd had from childhood, that it hadn't really been dissipated, that I'd held with me, right? I still had all that anger. So I went to college for a couple of years, Colorado College I went to. Turns out it's an incredibly liberal school. And wasn't at the time, I wasn't even mature enough to understand my own politics or how I felt about things. But I knew when I got there that the way that their approach to things was extremely left-wing and extremely liberal, and it didn't sit right with me. And so I didn't fit in there either. Come to find out, I'm fairly conservative in terms of my politics, and I was starting to realize that then, but didn't know how to verbalize it. And so my studies there really suffered, and I think for a couple of reasons. One, I wasn't happy, and two, I really started drinking. When I got to college, you could still buy 3.2% beer when you were 18, and I was 18, and I could buy gallons of the stuff, enough to get drunk. And there were, if there was a keg party, I was going to stay until the beer was gone out of the keg.
Till the keg was floating.
Till the keg was floating.
Hey, can we go back to your childhood when you were getting shifted around to schools? You must had a pretty strong mechanism to survive, to go from school to school, to make new friends, but internally, you were probably a pretty street smart kid after your first iterations, getting to the last prep school and then to college. I mean, you must have honed some other skills that other kids don't have to hone, discarding your whatever you think your academics look like, but there was other lessons that had to be learned, Gordon, in that atmosphere, good, bad, or indifferent. For sure. And I give a lot of credit to my survival in my childhood to God.
I think God had a role in my life without me even realizing it. And go back to that year that I was 8 years old and got displaced out of my home, and we ended up in that condo in Marblehead, Massachusetts. I remember, and I didn't come from a religious background, but I started, in essence, I started praying without ceasing. And it sounded just like this. I was going, oh my God, 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 oh my God. Inhaling and exhaling nonstop, saying, oh my God, for months, until finally one day my mother, I remember, she just like lost it. She was pulling at her hair and she was freaking out. And she was like, stop it, just stop it, stop it. She couldn't handle it anymore. She had, her plate was full, it was overflowing. And that was just one more thing. And I remember thinking clearly, I'm like, okay, I'll just say it inside my head now. And so in a way, I was so unguided and desperate for help. And God's grace came to me, and I knew intuitively, without having had any counsel, to ask for God's help. And so I think it's with God's help that I made it through much of that, because socially, emotionally, physically, I was challenged in all of those areas. And so really, I think it was that early connection with God that saved my life. But, if I wanted to talk about my first experience with alcohol, I think I was maybe 11 years old. And we went to a family of friends that we had in Vermont. Their family split up, and the dad was down in Mexico, and his kids went down to Mexico. So my mother and I went to Mexico to visit them. And there was a boy, I was friends with Abby, and she had an older brother, Bobby. And he said, hey, let's go down to the Tienda, the local market, and we'll buy some beer. I'm like, well, we can't buy beer. He's like, no, we're in Mexico. You can be 10 years old and buy beer. So we went down to the little shop and came back with a 6-pack of beer. And there were 3 of us, and I drank 4 of the beers. So if that's any indication of where my initial taste was for alcohol, you guys have 1, and that leaves 4 for me. Okay, great. Can we get more? So my next drink was always more. My favorite drink was always more, even from my first drink. And so, but then my relationship with alcohol after that was very intermittent. I didn't have access to it, and I didn't really engage in it until I got to college. And when I got to college, then I was in, full bore. I'm like, okay, I'm here and I'm going to party. This is college, and we're supposed to party. And that lasted for 2.5 years. And it was kind of a race between the school and I on whether I was going to withdraw or they were going to academically suspend me. That I think I failed at withdrawing before they suspended me. So basically I got suspended. And while I was there, again, because I didn't identify with the other students, I had started hanging out at this, a corner garage, a guy that had a shop there. And this man, his name was Zdeněk Kunstmuller, and he was Czechoslovakian in his heritage. And he had escaped from Czechoslovakia when it was behind the wall, right? With the Soviet bloc. And he found his way to the US and found his way to be able to get enough money to buy this lot on the corner, and worked 7 days a week, 18 hours a day, fixing cars to pay this place off. And I started hanging out there. He was a good influence, sort of. There was a lot of drinking there, but there were a couple other guys that were regular mechanics there, and they were just criminals, really. And I started hanging out with them and drinking a lot, really misbehaving, just doing stupid things. I bought a gun. I had a .45 caliber pistol because I wanted to be a gangster. I had all this anger and rage, and I just figured I need to have a gun, and I got one. And I remember I was driving around on a motorcycle, and I would carry my gun, and I was at a party with a bunch of girls, and I picked up one of the girls, and I was like, yeah, we're going to. And first I was drunk and riding fast through the town. And I remember her yelling, he's like, hey, did you see that cop we just passed? And I was like, no, is he following us? And she said, yeah. So what do I do? I drop it a gear and pop, off I go into the residential area to lose the cop. And this is in Colorado Springs, and they have floodwater controls. And so actually on a lot of these roads, there were drainage ditches that went perpendicular to the road, but that were in the road. And we were going along just as fast as I could go. We hit one of these drainage ditches, wham, and we just launched that motorcycle. And I'm drunk and hanging onto that, and she's hanging onto me, and we're all flying with a motorcycle in the air. And I landed it. I didn't wipe out. I didn't crash. Again, the hand of God definitely played a factor in my life in that moment, at that time. And what I remember is what I don't remember, because I don't remember after landing the motorcycle. I don't remember how I got home, and I woke up the next morning and she was gone and I had no idea what had happened. So that was my first real blackout. And as a result of that, I realized that my life I was spinning uncontrollably down, making bad decisions and going in the wrong direction. And I was really feeling desperate. I'd been basically kicked out of school. I had a job that wasn't paying the bills, and riding around drunk on a motorcycle with a gun was not a direction that was going to look good. And I was down at that auto shop one day talking to Zdenek Kunstmuller, and I remember I was kind of joking, and I was like, man, I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe I'll join the Coast Guard. I was like, I couldn't think of anything more desperate than joining the Coast Guard. So that's what I said. And he stopped what he was doing and he looked at me and he said, Gordo, do it. And he was serious as a heart attack. So being in Colorado Springs and trying to join the Coast Guard is damn near impossible, is what I found out.
Makes some sense.
I called the number in the yellow pages, because that was of course, NORAD was there, but the number for the Coast Guard wasn't right. I was finally able to get connected with a recruiter in Denver, and he got me set up to take the ASVAB at one of the Army bases in Colorado Springs. And I knew that I had to be on time, because if you were a minute late to the ASVAB, they wouldn't let you in. And I drove to the Army base, and this was my first encounter with military intelligence, because the way they numbered the buildings made no sense. Like, I couldn't find the building, and I arrived 45 minutes early, and it took me 50 minutes to find the damn building. So obviously I wasn't going to make the test, but at that point I was determined. I said, I'm going to find the room that the test is given in, so that when I come back, I will know
where it's at.
I know where it's at. And I walked into the building.
You did a route recon.
I did. And, I found the room, and then here comes down the hallway comes this guy in a uniform. And the irony is that I really didn't want to talk to anybody in uniform at that point. But there had been a couple of cool Vietnam era pictures on the walls, and I was checking them out. And he came right up to me and was like, so he knew what was going on. He's like, what are you doing? Like, well, and I told him about not finding the building and finding the room. He goes, turns out he was an Air Force recruiter. He was like, well, have you thought about the Air Force? So I had to think of a reason really quickly why I had wanted nothing to do with the Air Force. And I didn't know much about it, but I knew I wasn't going to be a pilot. I didn't want anything to do with the Air Force. So I just said, no, I really like the ocean. He said, oh, well, I know a Navy recruiter in town, and he didn't have to get past the word she, because I'm this horny young 20-year-old. And I'm like, where is she? And he gave me I drove there that day. I'm like, I'm going to go meet her right now. Maybe I'll get lucky. I don't know what this recruiter's willing to do to get me to sign up, but that means I might get lucky too, right? And I walked into this recruiting office, and they gave me like this pre-ASVAB test, and I guess I did pretty good with it, because the chief called me in the back office, and he was like, "Let me tell you about the nuclear engineering."
Oh my God! Anybody that does it halfway well, you get.
Oh, and I wanted
jammed down your throat.
Wanted nothing to do with nuclear engineering, but I'd seen this poster on the wall when I came in, and it was those guys coming out of the water with the green faces and the guns, and I'm like, what's that? What's that program? He's like, oh, that's the SEALs. You don't want anything to do with the SEALs. That you'll never make it. I was like, huh. So I left that office, and I went to try to do as much research. I went to what people may remember is called a library, and found books that were in paper and with print on them. And there wasn't much written about the SEALs. There were a couple books.
There wasn't ever. I mean,
no. But one that I found was Men with Green Faces.
Oh yeah. Iconic men with green faces.
I found
and
that.
then recruiting video, Someone Special. Have you ever seen that one?
I think I saw it later on. Yeah, I did.
Yeah, it was very funny.
So I read that book, Men with Green Faces, and that, just to back up a minute, all that anger I had was still inside of me. And as I was riding around on my motorcycle with that gun, I was so angry. I was like, man, I don't care what I do. I'm going to kill somebody. I just wanted to kill somebody. And I didn't know who or why. I couldn't put any of those things together, but I just had this overflowing anger. And I realized, I'm like, well, if I kill someone here on the streets, that's not going to go well for me. But if I join the military and I find the unit that's going to be the tip of the spear, then I can let loose my hate and discontent. That's going to be the place where it can be utilized for something that's not going to get me in trouble. So after reading all this about the men with green faces and the missions that they went on and the killing that they did, I said, that's the job for me. I went back to the recruiting office and I said, okay, I want to sign up and I'm going to be a SEAL. And again, the chief was like, no, nuclear. I'm like, no, forget it, dude. I already know. I'm going to join the Navy because I want to go into the SEAL teams, and that's what I want to do.
Did they have dive fare back then? What was the program you enlisted under?
So I don't remember if they had dive fare. They may have, but I don't remember.
It was after my time, but I remember it going on where you had a contract to BUD/S prior to going in.
Yeah, I think it was available, but I ended up not doing it. So my recruiter said, so you need a source rating to be a SEAL. So you have to pick an A school that's one of the source ratings. Why don't you pick electronics technician because you did really well on our ASVAB test. And the advantage to electronics technician is that you're going to get E4 coming right out of A school.
Yes, long A school.
That sounds pretty good. So I signed me up. So I did. I enlisted in the Navy. I hadn't even told my mother. Hadn't told anybody. I enlisted in the Navy without letting anyone know I was even looking at it. And I got signed up to be an electronics technician. And then I called home and said, "Oh, and by the way, Mom, I joined the military. I'm going into the Navy, and I want to be a SEAL." She had no idea what SEALs were, but she wasn't happy about the fact that I had decided to enlist in the military, that I wasn't an officer. So I got to my ACE, or I got to boot. I knew that I then had to volunteer to go to BUD/S. And what my recruiter said is when you get to boot camp, you can raise your hand and you can volunteer to go to BUD/S. And then when you finish your A school, it'll be good. So I got to boot camp and I volunteered. They said, no, you got to do that when you get to your A school.
Oh my God. I have the same story, brother. I'll tell you in a second. Go ahead.
I got to my A school in Orlando, Florida, the first half of my ETA school. It was summertime. And I went to volunteer there, and my request coming back denied. Well, I hadn't read the small print in the contract that I had signed to be an electronics technician. I could only volunteer to go to BUD/S after I had served 4 years on a ship. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. But there were a couple dive motivators down there. One of them was one of the rare Black SEALs. Petty Officer Ward was the dive motivator. I think this was right after, I think, Operation Just Cause. I don't know if he was there, if he was recovering from injuries or something else, but it didn't matter. And there was another Black SEAL at that command, Master Chief Oliver.
Oh, yeah.
I remember very well. It was a
Ollie, yeah, great guy.
And I had a 6-pack of Sam Adams, and I saw Petty Officer Ward. It was, we were going out into the park and whatever. And I said, Petty Officer Ward, can I offer you a beer? And I explained to him what had come down about the wording of my contract. And just then Master Chief Oliver walked by, and Petty Officer Ward got his attention. And I said, Master Chief, may I offer you a beer? So he, there they are drinking my beer, which was a small price to pay. And Master Chief Oliver said, who's your Master Chief over there? He's a brother, isn't he? I said, well, yes, Master Chief, I believe that he is. He said, okay, you put your chit in again on Monday and it's going to be approved. And so I said, very well. And I put my chit in again on Monday and it came back approved. And there were a couple other kids that were at the ETA school that were trying to do what I did. And they put their chits in, a couple of them quickly after I had done it. We were all approved. And then someone read the rest of the contract. And no one else's chits got approved. So there were 3 or 4 of us from that ET that ended up going to BUD/S.
My story is very similar. So I did my high school thing on Long Island, and similar story with what happened with your dad. My dad was just a shitbag. He left. And my mother died of cancer in high school. And I was a good hockey player. I should have went away to play hockey. One of them was actually St. Anselm's up by you. And I wish somebody said, go play hockey in college. And I didn't listen. I went out west and played a low level of minor league hockey, and I got cut. And I always liked the water. I wanted to be a diver, right? I'm like, I couldn't afford dive school. I was on my own at this point. I'm going to go in the Navy to go to dive school. I go to my recruiter. Hey, I want to sign up for dive school. You got to do it in boot camp. I get to boot camp. Hey, I want to go to dive school. You got to wait to A school. So I get to A school here in Dam Neck, OSA school, and I was a good baseball player too. And the instructors had me on their softball team because they wanted to win the base title. And I got close to one of them, drinking with them. I'm like, hey, look, I'm trying to get to fucking dive school. What do I need to do here? He goes, look, don't tell anybody I told you this. finish in the top of your class, get orders that are 1 year, 6 months into your tour of 1 year, you could screen for a program. So I pick Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. I get down there six months in, I'm putting in for dive school. Well, the people screening for dive school was an EOD detachment. I get down there, like, you don't want to be a fucking diver. They wear dungarees, they go on these junk boats. You want to be an EOD tech. We wear these greens, we're cool, we blow stuff up. So that's how I wound up going to EOD. But it's the same shit. They just kept, passing me along till somebody took me and said, this is what you need to do. Because they were just stringing me along till somebody like Oliver or Petty Officer Ward said, this is what you need to do, and actually advocated for you to get to where you are. And then the segue is, I get into EOD. I'm over in Rota, Spain. Some SEALs come through on a jump trip, start PT and hanging out. Like, you don't want to go back to EOD. You want to go to SEAL training. I'm like, what the hell is that? All I saw these guys with this giant gold thing on, having a fucking time of their life in Rota, Spain. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to go back to a mobile unit. I want to go to BUDS. And I read about it in the back of Link magazine. Remember Link magazine? There was a little blurb on that stuff about what the jobs are. And that's how I wound up going to SEAL training in '88, because Rich Dobrik and Rizzo talked me into it. I knew nothing about it, and it was very interesting. A lot of our stories are very similar, Gordon.
Nice. Yeah, that reminds me though. I mean, like when I joined the Navy, I'd always been a runner, right? And I knew that to screen you had to do pull-ups. And I tell people, take a guess at how many pull-ups I could do when I joined the Navy. And the answer was 0. I couldn't do 1. And when I got to boot camp, there wasn't a pull-up bar. I started hanging off the door jamb on the emergency exit, right?
Wow.
And like,
that's motivation.
By the time I got to the end of the boot camp, I could do a couple, right? And so in a way, that year-long A school was what I needed, because it gave me the chance to swim and to PT often, and I put little motivational things around in my room to kind of motivate me. And so I got so I could do pull-ups poorly. Pull-ups were always a challenge for me. I got these long, skinny arms, and I broke the arm.
The little guys do great with pull-ups with the short arms.
Short guys, they always would piss me off about that. But I knew how many pull-ups I had to do to screen, and I passed the screening. I got to BUDS, and I got there right as 179 was about to form up. And so I got to spend an extended period of time in 4th phase, because they didn't class me up with 179. I guess it was already nearly full. And so I got a full benefit 4th phase, which I really needed in terms of conditioning. And then started it, to go into to class up for class 180. And I remember we had to do the class up test. And what I hadn't realized is that the number of pull-ups had gone up. I had to do more pull-ups, and I'm sweating it because I was struggling with these pull-ups. I was fast at running. I was fast at swimming. I could do the sit-ups like crazy. I could do the push-ups reasonably well. And so I did my, the run and the swim and the push-ups and the sit-ups, and pull-ups were before the run or something like that. I think, I don't remember. But I was kind of at the end of the line of the guys doing pull-ups, because I'm thinking to myself, I'm not going to make it. And I had to do 10 pull-ups. And I remember I did the pull-ups, and I got to 8, and I started to struggle, and I got to 9, and I just barely made 9. And I went to get the 10th pull-up, and I couldn't get it, and I dropped down. But the instructor had been shooting the shit with his buddy. And when I dropped down, he said, "Hey, how many pull-ups did you do?" I said, 10. So I got classed up doing only 9 pull-ups. I cheated, man, and got in. So yeah, there I was, class 180, and it was incredible. I remember, parts of it were just so miserable, and yet parts of it were just so amazing. I loved the challenges. I liked the mental, push that you needed. And what I realized is that there were a lot of guys that were in BUDS that had shown up that they had these chiseled bodies. They looked like Greek gods. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm never going to make it. Look at these guys.
I showed up with college swimmers, collegiate athletes. They were the first ones to go.
They quit. They were quitting in pool, right?
Yes.
Or before that, when you're tied up and having but I could float. I could manage the water. I could swim, and I could relax in the water. And so even when I was stressed and realized I really wanted another breath of air, the only way to get it was to exhale and relax and bounce to the surface and control my heart rate and bring it down. And so that just all became very second nature to me, and I was good at that. And Yeah, I loved it. And my goal, I had all that anger. And what I tell people also is that it's not the physical aspect of buds that really
It's the mental part of it. They're going to
it's
beat everybody down the same.
it's the cold. It's the cold.
And the cold too. Yeah.
And the cold played a significant role. And there was one time going through training when I considered dropping out, and it was in dive phase. And we were
dive phase. It was third phase back then, right?
It was second phase.
So they had changed it by then, where dive was second phase.
Third phase was land warfare.
Gotcha.
And it was January, and it was cold. And I remember, it would be raining and cold, and we were diving twice a day, and we'd be done at 3 o'clock in the morning and up at 6 o'clock in the morning and diving again and going through classes. Wow, it was just intense. And the instructor said, "Okay, gentlemen, you have from after lunch until dinner is your time, free time." And I was exhausted, and it was one of these cold, miserable, rainy, wet, dreary days. And we got back to the barracks, and I crashed out. I didn't take my boots off, and I was out cold. And I wasn't in bed but about 15 minutes when the instructor showed up with the bullhones. Everybody, and the hammer session started. So they were just messing with us. It was all a mind fuck, right? You guys have the day off. Now you have the expectations of having the day off, but no, because it's so cold and miserable, we're going to torture you surf zone. So we ended up out on the beach and in and out of the surf zone.
God, what did you guys do as a class to piss them off to get fucking tortured in dive phase?
What did we not do as a class?
I don't know.
Yeah, no, we had a class of jokers, and our class leader was Paul Parmenter, and he'd been a diver, and he'd known the team, the SEALs, and so he knew some of the instructors. And I don't even know.
You got full benefit.
We got full benefit. So we were out there, and my roommate was this guy, Joel Youngs, and he was this skinny ass kid from Philadelphia. He was tough as nails and the skinniest kid in the class. And they kept pulling him out of the water and checking his temperature because they figured if he didn't have hypothermia yet, then nobody
else did.
So
nobody else did. Yeah. He was the test dummy.
He was the test dummy. And
hey, had they transitioned out of greens by then into camis?
No, we were wearing.
You were still in greens?
Yeah.
And orange K-Pox?
Yes.
Yep.
So I remember on the run over to the chow hall in that rain, I was freezing cold. I was super tired. We had another night dive coming up. I remember thinking, oh my God, I just don't know if I can do it. It was on that run. And it was about the duration of about 3 strides, 3 steps. I don't know if I can do it. And then I just had the full force of my mind come back in and said, fuck it. Yes, you can. They're going to have to kill you. They're going to have to kill you to make you drop out. And so it was those probably not even 3 seconds of time when I considered dropping out. But the rest of the time, it was just, in my mind, anytime I was really hurting, what I would say is they're going to have to kill me. They're going to have to kill me or they're going to have to break me because I am not going to.
Was alcohol part of your buds experience?
Not to a great extent. I mean,
you weren't hanging out McPee's with the instructors?
No, I definitely didn't go to McPee's. That was off limits. That was very clearly stated.
Just busting your balls, brother.
Yeah, no, I mean, I drank during buds, but not excessively, really. No, I don't think I could and have performed. The idea.
Me neither.
Having that came later. So I made it through buds, and I remember thinking, I'll go to any team except for Team 1. The only team I don't want to go to is Team 1. They just had this reputation of being just a bunch of assholes, really. And of course, when orders came out, we all ended up over at Team 1. I was like, damn it. And I'm like, all right, cool. Well, I like to work in the dive locker. I want to work in the armory, or I want to work in the as a rigger in the parachute loft. And I got to Team 1. I was the only ET, and they said, no. You're going to the comm shack. You're going to be the comms guy. I'm like, the only thing I didn't want to do was go to Team 1. And when I got there, the main job I didn't want to have was be a communicator. So here I am at Team 1, where I didn't want to be as a communicator, what I didn't want to do. But whatever. Got to Team 1, and what I found out is that SEALs like to drink, and they like to drink just like I did. And so I started drinking. I started drinking like a SEAL even before I got my trident pinned on. And, that day.
Oh, question. I just look at my phone a second. I am listening about getting a Trident. What was your pipeline back then? Was it SQT or STT? Did the teams run it, or did Group 1 run it?
It was STT at Team 1. So it was not run by the group, and it was all, it was very much. And I mean, that talk about getting hammered in buds. There were a bunch of us that ended up going to Team 1 together, and then we were all in STT together. And again, we were getting in trouble. We're doing a compass course, and I loved land.
We're out at Nyland.
I think we were up at
Compost or
Big Bear. I think we were in Big Bear.
Oh wow.
And because the hills were steep, it's like the points have always got to be from the top of one hill to the top of the next hill.
Right.
But I could hike and I could carry a ruck and I could land navigate. So I was cruising along pretty well. But then whenever people would call in on the radio, I would stop and listen. And they had this whole code, like, okay, everyone's going to have their code book, and we're going to, we've got a code book to correlate to yours. And I was writing down what everyone was saying. And I figured out I broke the code. I was able to write down in my notebook and figure out, so that when they gave me a point to go to, I already knew what was at that point. I already knew what to call. Now, I was honest about it. I went to every single point that I was assigned to. I never didn't go. And but there were a couple guys that were not good land navigators, and they weren't good at carrying a ruck, and they weren't good at hiking, and they were really falling behind. And the instructors started to put pressure on the radio to them, like, what's up with you guys? You need to keep up. Like, what are you doing? And we weren't coming back to base. This was a couple day long program, and we were sleeping out in the field. So we had to carry everything we were going to sleep with, and all our food and our radio and everything, so it was a heavy pack. And so this one guy, all of a sudden he started calling in checkpoints. Like, there was no way. Like, if he'd been at a dead run, it would have been impossible for him to have made it in that amount of time from the first checkpoint to the second checkpoint. So the instructors caught on. They were like, they're cheating. And I remember I had just arrived at the base of the hill, and I knew at the top of the hill was the point that I was going to. And there were a couple other guys that were there. And I sat down. I was eating an MRE with them, and we got the call on the radio to return to base. And those guys have been doing the same thing that I've been doing, which was writing down all the points in their notebook. And they tore it all out of their notebook and threw it in the fire. So I tore the stuff out of my notebook and threw it in the fire. And we went back into camp. And as soon as we got there, the instructors were there, and they were like, give us your notebook. Give us your notebook. They took everyone's notebook, and they found everyone that had been writing down those points, and they caught a bunch of people cheating. So that was bad news for our class, because when we went to Nyland, they punished us. Like, there was like, okay, yeah, there's a nice facility here, which at the time it was still the old building and everything, but it was, we slept in tents on cots outside. We were not allowed in the building for the whole time. It was a month, and we didn't get chow. We had to eat MREs every day. They were like, you guys are a bunch of shitbags, so you're going to suffer. And we did. But alcohol, I definitely started to increase my relationship with alcohol. I started to drink with, like a team guy. I started drinking, if not every night, almost every night, to varying degrees. I would show up to the team area, varying levels of sobriety, hungover or not, right? And it definitely affected my performance. If I had been able to get a handle on my drinking at that time, I would have been a much better SEAL. And so that's a regret that I have, that, alcohol reduced my capability to be a better team guy. So moving forward, I had met this lady, Amy, and proposed to her. And actually, part of the story that's relevant is when I got to Team 1, one of the first things I wanted to do was get off-base housing, and I got approved for it. I was going to get a stipend per month, and I realized that wasn't going to be quite enough to pay for an apartment anywhere. And a lot of guys would shack up together and room together or whatever, to pool their money. But I figured out I could buy a cheap-ass sailboat and put it at a marina, which had just opened at the Lowe's Coronado Bay Resort, a couple miles down the Strand, 5-star resort. I could buy a cheap-ass sailboat, live on the boat, and the money that I was getting was more than enough to cover my slip fee and continue to pay for the boat. So I lived on a boat pretty much from 1992 and for a long time after that, actually, because I met Amy, and I proposed to her, and she said yes, with the contingency that I had the choice to make. It was either a family with her or the family of team guys that I had been with. And so I made the decision to get out. And when I did that, there was a couple that were speaking at a West Marine, Lynn and Larry Pardee, and they were a couple that had sailed around the world countless times on a 30-foot wooden boat. And we went and heard them speak. And I just remember being like, wow, that is something I want to do. And Amy wanted to do it too. And we were like, okay, well, I got this 30-foot Catalina. We can do it. You know, it's kind of not really an ocean going boat, but maybe we'll just be careful. And then there was the America's Cup race that was there. And it was me and Amy and about 10 other team guys. And we were all out sailing on this day. It was the day that I think it was the New Zealand boat broke in half and sank. It was rough. And I remember being on that boat and I'm like, this boat was cracking and creaking and twisting. I remember looking at Amy. I'm like, there is no way we're going to take this boat anywhere significant and survive.
So your sailing skills were that good to be able to sail open ocean that good?
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah. So we sold that boat and we bought a boat that was a complete disaster. It needed a lot of work, but that meant it was affordable. And we put that at the marina and started going through it. Now, one of Amy's uncles that had been a SEAL, he'd stayed in Coronado. He was from Team 5 and he was still there and he was working as a lifeguard, but his parents had moved out with him. And his father, Amy's grandfather, had been a machinist at Springfield Armory. And he's got a wonderful story. He ended up quitting his job as a machinist so that he could enlist in the Seabees. And he did, and he got to Iwo Jima at like D+7. He's one of those guys that was out there under fire bulldozing the landing strip.
Yeah.
Crazy. But he was a very, very skilled machinist. And so he and I took this boat apart and put it back together and built it solid. And then as I was transitioning out of the Navy, we took the boat and moved it out into Glorietta Bay, and we were at anchor in Glorietta Bay, living at anchor in Glorietta Bay.
It's gorgeous.
Moving around because you could only stay in each anchorage a couple days at a time. And we got, our goal was to sail. And like, well, all right, let's go. Well, I don't know. Where are we going to go? Not sure yet. But we're going to go until we're done. And ultimately we got to the point, and I remember, the list of things to do, there would always be, I'd scratch one thing off the list and add two more things on the bottom. And one night we were there anchored in Glorietta Bay underneath the Coronado Bridge. And I just said, fuck it, this list. And I crumpled it up and threw it over the side. And let's leave right now. Let's sober up and leave in the morning. So that's what we did. I quit drinking that night for that day. And we woke up at dawn and went out of San Diego Bay and we took a left. And we were gone for years. We lived on that boat with no refrigeration, no nothing, no cell phone, no computer, nothing for years. And our son was born in Panama and our daughter was born in Hawaii.
Did you have money saved at that point, or what were you doing for?
I had saved some money. Yeah, I'd saved some money, but it wasn't like a lot of money. But we were living. We were spending about $400 a month, and that included beer.
Yeah, sailboaters don't spend any money. That's why the marinas don't like them.
No, I never went to a marina. I lived at anchor, and I spearfished for food. And I found out that if I had fish, I could trade for food. And if I saw a shrimp boat come in and anchor and they had their little rowboat, I would go over. I had a rib with a motor and I would put them in the boat or tow them and they would give me shrimp and calamari. Like I had a copy of Yule Gibbons Beachcomber's Handbook and we would walk down the beach and be like, wow, what's this? This is cool. Can you eat it? I don't know. Let's try. So like scraping stuff off of rocks and eating it and, venturing further inland and finding, different things that you could eat, bananas and coconuts, and you could find mango.
Could we go rewind a second? What was your deployments in the teams like? Did you deploy or?
Yeah, we
PI?
2 deployments. When I got to Team 1, the last deployed team was coming back from the PI. So I did 2 deployments to Guam.
I got you.
Yeah. And so I did 2 workups and two platoons with Team 1.
Gotcha. Okay. So back to sailing.
Yeah. And actually this whole time sailing, now my governor for what normal drinking had been set by being in the teams. So my idea of what normal drinking was team guy drinking, which is not anything even close to normal, right? But I was never an angry drunk. I was not one of the guys that would go in the bar and get in brawls and fist fights. I was always kind of the peacemaker or the getaway driver. I can think of more than one occasion where there was a brawl and I ended up like, getting the man, we got to get out of here now. Mm-hmm. And so I was always a happy drunk. Like I was never an angry drunk. And one of the gifts that all that difficulty and challenge of going through buds had given to me was it had burned so much of that anger that I've been holding. Like that was the fuel for my fire to get me through buds, was that anger. And most of it, not all of it, most of it was gone. So, now I'm drinking like a teen guy out in the civilian world, and sailing, and sailors like to drink. And so I fit right in there as well. And we sailed, and we spent 6 months in Panama, or 6 months in Costa Rica. No, 6 months in Mexico, 6 months in Costa Rica. And we spent almost 2 years in Panama. And that's where our son was born. And when he was 5 months old, I was really driven to I was on rails. I was goal oriented. I'm like, okay, this is the weather window. We're going to go west. We got to get across the Pacific before it's hurricane season. So we left when he was 5 months old. We sailed out to the Galapagos. We spent about a month there. And we sailed from the Galapagos to the Marquesas, which is about a 2,700 mile trip. And there is nothing between the two islands except ocean. We got halfway between the two oceans, and there's nothing. We're on this 34-foot boat. We had bad weather. At one point, our main sail blew into shreds, and I had to take it down and sew it back together for the next couple of days. That's the only job I had, was repairing the sail. Got it back up, and we got to the Marquesas, and ultimately ended up in Hawaii. And when we were in Hawaii, again, I was drinking the whole time, but on the boat, occasionally I was limited by availability. We ended up in Hawaii, and we sold the boat, and we bought a home. It was a modest home on the Big Island, and now I could drink.
Were you working at this point?
Yeah, I got a job. It was kind of funny how I got the job, but anyway, this guy was a general engineering contractor, and he needed help, and he said, I'll hire you for 2 weeks to, at whatever, $20 an hour or something. And I said, great, I need the cash. So I had a job for 2 weeks. At the end of the 2 weeks, he said, you're a pretty good worker. I want to keep you on. I said, well, you can, but not for $20 an hour. So he said, how about 45? I said, okay.
Wow. What a story, man.
Yeah. I started working, just, doing general engineering construction, a little bit of this, a little bit of anything, a lot of commercial construction, no residential. And I loved it, and I was good at it. And I was there, and I bought a little tractor, and I got a tiller and a mower, and I would hire myself out on that, again, at $50 an hour for me and the machine. And I was making good money. I was working hard. So I had expendable income, and I drank beer. I drank it. Every day I would drink probably 6 beers, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. And Amy started to have a problem with how much I was drinking. And I'm like,
behavioral
what?
changes, or what was going on at home?
Or
you just had enough of it?
I think she just had enough of it. I liked the feeling of being slightly intoxicated. I liked that feeling because while I said I burned up that anger, what I hadn't dealt with was any of my ability to handle emotional conflict or emotional difficulty.
Look at the way you grew up.
Yeah.
I mean, it all ties back to this stuff, brother.
Yeah. I mean, my earliest memories of emotional challenges were with my mother, right? And I was just torn apart by everything that had happened, and I was upset. And my mother and I would just be screaming at each other. And the next thing you know, she's threatening to commit suicide. And I'm like,
well, your father committed suicide, for God's sake. This is part of your story, bro.
Part of my story. And so I got this deep-seated fear of emotional conflict. Like, there was never a resolution to any of that. There was
You probably have a deep-seated fear. What I do with father, abandoned mother, I have serious abandonment issues stemming from daddy issues. And it's crazy what catches up to you later in life. It is crazy.
It caught up with me because I was unable to handle emotional conflict unless I had a beer, because alcohol wasn't my problem. It was my solution.
It's your coping mechanism.
Alcohol was my solution to everything. And it didn't matter if it was a difficulty or a pleasure or a joy or whatever it was. I liked alcohol. I liked the feeling. It dropped from me that guard. It allowed me to be, what I felt was more honest and open and able to communicate. Without that alcohol, with any kind of a verbal disagreement, I would just shut up. I wouldn't say anything. I couldn't.
Social lubricant.
Yeah. But only with those who were closest to me. If I was outside in a group of strangers, there was nothing, you'd have a hard time shutting me up. That wasn't a problem for me. But in a relationship that mattered, like my marriage, I was unable to have an honest conversation without alcohol.
You
So
didn't know how to communicate. You didn't learn it as a child. I'm
no,
going through some of this right now in counseling with my wife, using all of the, stuff available through the foundation. They're very kind, but you get so insulated by your life as a child that you can't even verbalize what's going on because you're in total. That's why I brought it before about your survival mode. That's what you know. So
yeah,
what do we do with problems? We stuff them down. They become anger. They come out in other ways. They got dissipated in buds and some other things. I got it dissipated in buds and EOD and some other things, playing ice hockey. But the thing is, this inability to communicate is a common thing with team guys until you actually learn how to do it.
yes. And it's a road, and I'm still on it. I'm nowhere near gaining perfection with this. But so Amy started to have, she started to not like how much I was drinking. We went to
Hawaii.
In Hawaii, yeah. And the counselor was like, "Well, how much do you drink?" I'm
Hey,
like,
let me ask you a question right now. You bought a house in Hawaii?
yeah.
How, you ever look at how much it's worth now?
I don't dare look. It'd be devastating.
I could look it up on Zillow for you. You want me to do real? I'm joking.
I'm not going to tell you the address. I won't do it.
Yeah, it might be a trigger.
Yeah.
All right.
But so we had a counselor, and he's like, "Well, you're drinking more than a case of beer a week." I'm like, "Well, that's not that much. We used to drink a case of beer a day. I've cut back.
Yeah.
This is good." And so fast forward a little bit, we ended up leaving Hawaii. We I don't know. I don't need to get into all those details, but I remember hanging out with one of Amy's childhood friends. We were drinking, and she's like, so all of a sudden we're talking about how much I drank. And we made a bet. They're like, "I bet you can't go a year without drinking." I'm like, "I can go a year without drinking. I'll start tomorrow." And I did. I put it down. I started the next day, and I went a year without drinking, and I didn't really have a problem at all. And actually, in that year, my relationship with Amy grew much closer. I was learning how to become vulnerable. I was learning how to share my truth and my secrets and things that happen on the inside. And at the end of the year, I'm like, okay, well, the year's over. I can drink again. And I started drinking again. And she was furious. She was so angry. And I remember being baffled, like, "Well, why? I don't understand why you're mad, because I made an agreement to not drink for a year. And now, that agreement is up, and I can drink again. I didn't say I wasn't going to drink for the rest of my life. I said a year, and I did the year." And that, going back to drinking, really damaged our relationship. And she ended up kicking me out of the house and divorcing me. And I felt
Geographically, where you're right now, you're up where you are now. When did the separation and divorce come? Where geographically?
In Oregon.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, I've known you a while. I didn't even know you lived in Oregon.
Yeah. I mean, there's some details to my story that that I've got to have more time.
No, I get it.
If we had time in the parking lot, you'd know a lot more. But because the Zoom meeting ends and that's kind of the end of the meeting, you just get the snippets. Mm-hmm. And so, that separation, that divorce, that what I felt was such a huge betrayal. And I'm sure Amy felt betrayed as well because of my drinking again. And I don't want to point a finger at Amy and say, "Oh, she was so evil and bad, and she did this to deliberately hurt me." And our relationship had deteriorated to a point that's where we ended up. And it hurt badly. And so now I'm on my own. I have these two young, beautiful children, and I love them as much as there's not.
I know how you talk about your kids affectionately. I know how much you care for them. That's known.
I was devastated. And I remember I was renting this little shack in the woods that was had a loft upstairs. And I remember laying in bed, and my heart was in physical pain. And I almost felt like if I could stab it with an ice pick, it would relieve the pain. I was just suffering that much. And what did I do? Like any good drinker does, I went to the one solution that I knew would work, and that was alcohol. And at that point, I started to drink like you read about. I started drinking much heavier than I ever had before, even in the teens.
Just beer, or anything you get your hands on?
Mostly beer, occasionally liquor. I could drink beer, but if I drank liquor, I got too drunk too quick. and I like to be drunk for a while. And
you like sustaining that BAC.
Yes, yes, yeah. I want to kind of get it to a level and then maintain it for the rest of the night. And that did allow me to be reasonably functioning the next day. And so there in Oregon, I needed to do something. So I ended up again. I went to construction, but I started building residential homes. But now here I'm on my own. And then I started to have some success with the residential homes. And but then Amy and I are still going to counseling, even though we were divorced. And after a couple of years of counseling, we decided to try to reconcile our relationship, and we did. And we came back together, and that was a powerful moment. And there's a lot to that story that I'm actually not going to get into. It's more personal, but so we came back together and started having a life together. And the bottom of the real estate market fell out. And I was like, oh man, I got to do something different. So I sold the place that I'd had there. I shut down.
Was this 08, 09? When was this?
Yeah.
The big crash. Yep.
Yeah.
I lost a buttload of property.
And I had
years to recover.
Yep. So then I had this dream that this wild-brained idea that I was going to start a farm. I'd read these books by Joel Salatin, and I decided I can't raise a vegetable to save my life, but I decided I was going to raise meat. So we drove around the country and looked for a place, and we found a piece of property that could be turned into, it once was and could be restored into a farm. It had some fields, some hay fields and pasture and whatnot. And I started farming. And here I am, I'm working at home, living at home, working 80, 90 plus hours a week, working every single day, raising this meat and starting a business. And it was hard. And I drank a lot during that time as well. And ultimately that business failed, and that failure really weighed on my mind. And that,
do you think it failed because you're drinking, or do you feel it just would have failed because of your knowledge of the business? Or what do you attribute it to? You couldn't work your way through it?
All of the above.
Okay.
I can't say that there's any one factor that I could exclude. Alcohol was a part of it. My disorganization was a part of it. I didn't have a good model. I was just kind of winging it. I took a team guy approach that, fuck it, I'm diving in head first, and I'm either going to make it or hit the bottom. And I hit the bottom.
How long did it take to auger in and hit the bottom? 3
years.
Any success during the 3 years?
I mean, I made enough money to break even, basically. But I remember one year I raised 400 turkeys for Thanksgiving, and I was gutting them, killing them, gutting them, and plucking them. I had hired some people to help me, and it took us 2 days to process the 400 turkeys. And I sold all these turkeys, and I got all this money. When I deposited the money in the bank, and I looked at what it had cost me to raise them and what I had gained from it, it was the same amount of money. I had made not a penny. And at that point, my hand actually was like, I couldn't even use a pen to sign my hand because I had been I had gut all the turkeys, and I'd done that same motion that 400 times. I couldn't even use my hand. I was like, well, that's it. I'm out, and we got to sell this place, and we're going to, and at the same time, another team guy buddy of mine called me up, and he's like, hey, there's this, you should come work as a contractor with me. We're riding on ships. We're providing security for ships.
Was this with Rat?
Yeah. It was Trident Group. And at first I was like, no way. And then all of a sudden I didn't have any money, and I had bills that were coming in. And, the only thing that was floating us through is, again, the grace of God, because I would have a credit card bill due, and I would have a piece of farm equipment that would sell, and I would get enough money to pay that credit card. And then we would go the next month, and I wouldn't have any money, and a credit card would come in, and a piece of equipment from the farm would sell, and I would get enough money to pay that credit card bill. So I contacted Trident Group and found out everything.
Dude, you are a survivor from 7 years old on. That's what I said. I mean, you're amazing, man. Even through alcoholism, this shit's amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
It's true.
Yeah. So I got all my paperwork and documents signed up, and I went to the Trident Group where we did the SVC, which was the evaluation, where again you had to do pull-ups, right, with the body armor and the mags on. So I've been practicing my pull-ups, and I got it so I could do it. You had to run and push-ups and pull-ups and the time and all this kind of crazy stuff. And we were out of there, and Mike Ratliff, Little Rat, who was there at the time, he was basically running the detailing desk. He's like, "All right, brothers, I'm going to tell you how it's done. You put your name on the list, and you're on the list. And when when the contract comes through, then you get the call, and you're ready to go. And I can't tell you, whoever's on the list before you gets it." I took my documents out, and I put them on his desk, and I said, "Mike, I'm ready to leave right now. I have everything I need with me." He said, "Check, brother. Roger that." And he had me on a ship a week later. So I don't know what was going on with the line, but apparently.
Was that with Russ Baker? Was Russ out there then? Who were you with?
I don't remember Russ Baker. There were a bunch of different guys that were there. Russ Francis was there.
I don't remember him.
Yeah, a lot. We're all at the time. You had to be a team guy to work for Trident Group.
Yeah,
and that changed going down the road. But all of a sudden, I start contracting, and I was making not great money, but I was making enough money, and we were doing it. We were surviving, and life started. I mean, I was gone a lot. I was gone 6-7 months minimum, sometimes a little bit more each year, working on these ships. And one of the ironies of my life is early on in 2014, when I started this contracting, I was on one of the Maersk ships, and we were off the coast of Africa. And I'm looking at this young 22, 24-year-old kid who just came out of college and has his license. And I'm thinking to myself, God, the irony in Buds is I didn't quit in Buds because I didn't want to work on a ship. And here I am working on a ship, and this is pretty cool. Like, I like it. I like working on the ship. How do I get that job? And I'm looking at the young third mate. And, it's challenging to get your license if you don't go to one of the maritime academies. But there's a way to do it. And, we all signed in. We had to be ordinary seamen. We got a merchant mariner credential, but it was the absolute lowest level. And in order to do it, I had to upgrade that ticket. There were classes I had to take.
Yeah.
And I needed to be able to validate my sea time with the Coast Guard. So I started taking the classes, and I remember I went to upgrade my license from ordinary seaman to the next level. And a lot of the letters that I had to validate my sea time that had all been written by each individual captain on each ship came back as rejected, as not having the correct terminology. So this was a roadblock in my path to getting a license. I'm like, damn, how do I work this? But I got to be friendly with a captain on one of these ships and explain to him my dilemma. And he's like, all right, we're going to use the CFRs, the Code of Certified Federal Regulations, or Code of Federal Regulations, that's what it is, and write a sea service letter that is going to satisfy what you need for the sea service. And he was also able to, because they were all Maersk ships that I'd been working on, and he was a captain for Maersk, he was able to write a blanket letter where I got credit for, I think, 10 or 12 ships that I've been working on. So that was a lot of time because I needed sea time. I needed 1,080 days of sea time.
I had my 100-ton a couple of times. The team sent me through, then the agency sent me through, and I had a lapse. I had a towing endorsement, and I had a radar endorsement, but I should have kept the hours up. But no, it's a tricky wicket to get your ticket punched.
And I just started knocking down each obstacle, knocking it down, and the whole time, because I remember being on a ship and I was talking to another team guy, Trident guy. He was an officer, and there's two ways to do it. You go to academy or you get it through sea time. But I had a family to support, so I couldn't stop and go to school. I needed to be working and sending money home while I was getting my time. So that was really the only option that was open to me. So then I did that. Just started knocking that down, and one of the contracts with Trident Group was a contract for some people who shall not be named, and they saw me perform. I'd had a lot of experience on boats. I was able to fix shit. I brought fishing gear and was catching enough fish to feed the crew of 24 men fresh fish every 3 or 4 days. Would be a full meal of fish that I'd caught. And again, things would break and I would know how to fix it because I'd lived on my own boat for so long and the systems were very similar. And I'm mechanically inclined anyway, so I was useful. And they saw that, so they started to recruit me. And it took a couple of years, but ultimately I did. I got recruited into, working with those folks.
the client.
Yeah. And one of the contingencies is I need a license. So I was able to stay with Trident Group long enough to get my license. The writing on the wall for the end of the contracting with Trident Group was on the wall from day one. everyone who was there was like, man, this is a great contract, but it's not going to last forever. This could be the last contract. So you got to have a plan B. And again, by the grace of God, Trident kept the doors open and team guys working through the time that I needed to do it. Now Trident Group is still running, but they got all Greeks for the mare ships. They guys on the cruise ships. And so I got the sea time required, and then I took almost a year off. I went down to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, right when COVID started, and I started going to school. It was 9 months of school to get all of the classes that I needed: radar observer, celestial navigation, stability.
How is celestial navigation hard?
It's math. It's not hard if you know how to do math.
It'd be hard for me. I can count money. Pretty good at that.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you could do it.
So it's very interesting. When I was working for the client, I did a bunch of maritime contingency stuff, and I worked on an operation that up armored the barges that we sent over there to fix the pirate problem. Got rectified pretty quick once we took a aggressive stance. Suddenly, the piracy stopped.
Yeah, no, the pirates figured out not to attack the big blue ship because there was something in the air that was bad for them. Yeah.
Mostly made of lead.
Mostly. I got my
you went through your classes, 9 months down there. How was you drinking down there, and how's the relationship at home?
Let me back up a little bit here because 2016 was my first time coming into AA, and this was right in the middle of my contracting and before all of that.
What was your bottom there? Or what was a precursor?
So, during the contract, we couldn't drink. As per the contract, if we drank, we'd be fired.
You could do drugs because those two guys died in the port there, right?
Yeah, I don't think
was that during your time.
It was. I was getting into Trident Group. I was finishing the final requirement I needed to get there.
Oh boy,
themselves, right? And I'm watching the news, and I'm like, oh my god,
that's funny.
All this work, and
I'm laughing.
The contract is I'm not even going to get one, but it worked out. So I wouldn't drink at all on the ships. But when I got on the plane and it was wheels up, and I would drink like I deserved it. And so the time that I was at home, I would drink a lot. And, the time zones and also I started, in order to help me sleep, I was buying medication over the counter in Egypt that I needed a prescription for here, but I was buying it there.
What, Ambien?
It wasn't Ambien, but the guys called it Ambien Light. It was just basically a different drug that did the same thing.
One of the things they did in the teams, they used Ambien on us early on for test dummies because we can never sleep before anything we're doing. So it's a dangerous drug. So
it wasn't Ambien, but even still, I was combining it with alcohol, and not a good combination. And I was taking it every night to sleep. And if one is good, then two is better, right?
Oh yeah.
The prescription was one, and I would take two and sometimes more. And, flying back from Egypt, going through the time zones. And
I know. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East.
And, that long flight back and forth, and it was always the shitty seats in the plane and a lot of connections. And you had to fly through Detroit. That seemed like a requirement for anywhere you were going to go. So I got back in 2016. It was August. It was my birthday. And my neighbor called me up and he's like, hey, we're having hot dogs and moonshine. And I didn't care about
the famous hot dogs and moonshine story.
Yeah. But I'm like, I've never had moonshine before. Sounds great. Now, I'd been drinking on the plane. I drank the day before, and I'd been drinking that morning already. And so by 10 o'clock in the morning, I was housed. I was hammered.
You were cruising.
I was not cruising. I was crashing.
You were crashing.
Yeah. And, I remember coming home and I just wanted to go to bed. I was done. And I walked through the door, and I remember Amy was extremely mad at me. And I just remember the rage on her face, and I blacked out. I blacked out for the rest of that day and into the next day. I remember small snippets of that, but basically I became violent. And what I tell people, I'm like, if I'd seen anyone else do to my family what I've been doing them, I would have shot them like a dog immediately, dead, no questions asked. And yet I was the one who was attacking my family in the way that I had sworn that I would always protect them from. And that was my first bottom. And it took me a couple of days to sober up. And one of Amy's uncles had been in AA, or was a member of AA. And I called him on the phone, And he's like, "Oh man, you got to get to a meeting. You got to go to AA." And I'm like, "AA?" So I've looked up AA, and I found the hotline, called the hotline, and they found me a meeting, and it was in the the town next to me. And I remember going to my first meeting, and it turns out the meeting was at 7:30, but I thought it was at 7. So I showed up early, and I got to this church, and all the doors were locked and the lights were off. And I just walked around the building, and I sat down on the front step of this church, and I was unshaven and unshowered and, tear-stained eyes and blown a big snot bubble. And this lady walked past me, and she said, "You look like you're here for an AA meeting." She was right. So I went into AA. And I remember hearing someone's experience, strength, and hope in that meeting, and hoping that could make a difference for me. And a guy that I'd never met handed me my first big book. And so I decided, all right, I'm coming to AA.
Did you pick up a white chip that day?
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah, at that point, I didn't know how to be a part of AA, and to be part of AA would mean being humble enough to stand up and go pick up a white chip
And say, "Hey,
I did. Yeah.
I'm an alcoholic."
Right. And that's part of the story, and that's part of why my sobriety date is March 10th, 2022. It's not August 10th, 2016. Is that I started going to AA, but I didn't become a part of AA. I would go to meetings. I would go to step meetings and read the steps, but that's not doing the steps. I found a guy that I called my sponsor, and he gave me advice that almost killed me. He said, "Well, don't drink, go to meetings." And so I had sobriety, but no recovery. And, going through this time, it was about 3 years of just white knuckled sobriety, where I didn't give people my phone number. I didn't want them to know my name. I didn't want anyone that I was trying to work for to know that I was going to AA.
Yeah.
And I kept it a secret, and that secrecy really, those were some of the nails in the coffin. So coming into AA and not being a part of AA. And then ultimately, the closer I got to the job that I worked so hard, that I was so proud to get, meant that my relationship with AA ceased altogether. I stopped going to meetings. I stopped thinking about it. I didn't have any of the literature. And then during that job, I realized what a tool I was for them, how little they valued me or cared about me or my personal well-being or my safety. And all of a sudden, I didn't want to be there, but I didn't know how to get out of it. I'd worked so hard to get there. I was so proud of the fact that I had got there. And, it was a pretty cool unit of guys. It was a really cool job. And all of a sudden, I desperately wanted not to have it. And I was on a westbound plane, and the flight attendant went by and asked if I'd like a beverage. And I said, "Yeah, give me a ginger ale and 2 Jack Daniels." And I drank those Jack Daniels, and I had a couple more after that. And 2 things happened. One, all of that anxiety and stress and all of that immediately was gone. And then the worst possible thing happened, and that was I felt great. There were no consequences to that. And so I found my solution again, my solution that was alcohol. And I started drinking again. And what they say in the program is 100% true. If we're sober, our alcoholism is it's progressive. It's still progressive.
Doing push-ups on your back.
Yeah. So when I started drinking again, I started drinking on a whole nother level, like I'd never drank before. I started drinking in the morning. I'd never done that before, aside from a very few and rare occasions. Especially when there were time differences, I could justify drinking in the morning. But typically, even after coming back off a contract, I would still get settled into this time zone and wait till 5 before I started drinking. But on this occasion, it was, it was wheels up, and I was drinking badly. And ultimately, I don't know I was never given the particular details of why I was let go from that job. But I remember being called in from a long way away to come into the office on a Friday afternoon at noon. And I knew, I'm like, you don't get a promotion at Friday afternoon at noon. And I was let go. And when I was, said, we no longer need your services. And first of all, they did, because I'm very good at what I do. So they really didn't want me there. And I don't know if it was my drinking or because I had put my foot in I'd put a stake in the sand, and I told some people exactly what I thought of them. So I'd put my finger pretty deep into some people's eyes, standing up for myself and for the guys that I was with. And I was too junior to do that. And I think, so again, I don't know if it was I was keeping my drinking, to the best of my knowledge, pretty hidden. So I don't know if they knew the extent of how much I was drinking, but I also, made some waves. So either or. In that moment, I was devastated and relieved in equal parts, because I was so grateful that I wasn't going to be there.
Wasn't it good to be off that leash though?
Incredibly.
I hated it, dude. I hated telling them every place I had to go and what I was going to do, who I was meeting, looking at my relatives.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So unbelievable, the relief. And I didn't, I haven't, and I still don't talk about it a whole lot, just because, I don't know, there's a lot there. But so now I came home, and now I've been lying about drinking to my family. And now I'm like, oh, I'll just stop when I get home. But now I found I couldn't stop. Now I found I couldn't put it down. And I'm living at home, and Amy found alcohol. And I said, oh, shoot, I'm sorry. I had a slip. I won't.
What is that, like 2019, 2020?
21.
21, okay.
21. And that was a pattern that repeated itself. I kept hiding alcohol. She kept finding it, until I basically just I feel like I'd lost hope. And she was coming back from a trip, and I remember her calling me and saying, whatever you do, just don't drink. And I just couldn't not, and I was tired of hiding it. So when she walked in, there was alcohol on the table, and she said, are you drinking? And I said, yep. And walked out and got in the car and drove away. Went to a place, I bought a pillow, a blanket, and a bottle of vodka. And I stayed in the car in that early March, and it was cold and snowy. And I just basically stayed in the car for a couple of days drinking that vodka.
Was it at least good vodka?
It wasn't bottom shelf. It was probably,
mid-grade Stoli, something like that.
Yeah, something like mid-grade for sure.
All right.
Yeah. I still had enough money. I've been making good money, so I still had enough to drink.
Contracts pay good.
And again, by the grace of God, I had someone's name, a number in my phone, and it was a guy that I didn't really know him that well, but I knew in that moment that if I called him, he would help. And I called him up on the phone, and I said, TJ, I need help. And he said, man, what are you doing? Come to my house right now. And I went to his house, and I still had vodka in the car. And I'm like, TJ, I need your help, man. If I go out there and I touch that bottle, I'm going to drink it. You got to dump it out for me. And he told me later when he dumped it out, he's like, yeah, I went out there. I thought about drinking it too, but I dumped it out. And I have just this image of him walking in from the parking lot, dumping that bottle. And I thought about going into the parking lot and trying to slurp it off the ground. That's just, how low I was at that point. And we went to a Zoom meeting. It was my first Zoom meeting, and I hadn't wanted to be on Zoom. I hadn't wanted my face to be there. I didn't believe that it was secure. I believed it would be compromised, and I was paranoid about it. But at this point, my surrender was at the point where I was desperate. I was willing to do anything.
Hey, a little sidebar. The client does send people to rehab.
I'm sure.
They do. I had a guy, he wound up killing himself with alcohol, but worked maritime stuff with him, and they sent him down there for 30 days. When he got back, I actually took him to a couple meetings, and he's like, oh, I got this. Yeah, you got it, my ass. 2 months later, he vomits, in bed and dies in his own puke. Yep.
It's just as well. I'm grateful that I didn't, because then I would have owed him that much more. And I'm so grateful.
I hear you. I'm just stating they do send people to rehab.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people that need to go to rehab from there that haven't been there yet.
Yeah. So you got your buddy. You just
so we went.
You got through not slurping the vodka up off the ice.
Yeah. And This guy from Texas shared, and he was just amazing. And the message that I remember is he said, I'm going to tell you in the first 3 minutes of this meeting everything you need to know about AA. And then I'm going to go on and I'm going to tell you in the next hour what I just told you. He said, when you come into AA, you come all the way in. And when you sit down, you sit all the way down and you stay. And you stay. And I heard that. And
well, you know what the big book says about half measures?
Yeah. Nothing avails us nothing.
Yep.
And so I made a decision to come all the way into AA and to take a different approach, because the approach that I'd taken before, it ended in failure. So that wasn't going to work. I wasn't going to try the same thing again. I was going to try it a different way. So when I came in, I came in willing to be humble and honest, and really to look at myself and to work the steps as they're laid out in the big book.
How long did it take you to do the steps?
I'm still doing them.
Good. It took me like 2.5 years, brother.
One of the important things.
7 years for me to do my last amends. I was so fucking embarrassed.
One of the hugely important things for me is I describe myself as an insecure overachiever, which means that nothing I do is ever good enough. And I want that perfection right out of the gate. I wanted to do every step perfectly the first time, every time. And I had to let go of that. I had to say, look, I'm willing to do the steps imperfectly and to go through them in order so that I'll have the knowledge to be able to come back and do them more perfectly the next time. Because my perspective on the steps and what they mean with 3 days of sobriety is different than it was when I had 3 months of sobriety.
Absolutely. Your amends change. What you believe in amends changes. I call them living amends when people want to jump into stuff. And, I say, wait a little while. And by the time they get to their amends, is like they make their amends and the person says, well, you're doing a great job with your life. Don't worry about whatever happened. I mean, I think it's evolving. I didn't want to do 4 and 5 again. It took me like a year and a half to do 4 and 5. I just didn't want to do them again.
They're painful.
I did. I take my inventory, routinely and try to do the best I can. But yeah, I didn't. So
coming back in, I looked at the steps and I said, okay, I am powerless over alcohol. I could not put it down. I was going to suck it off it wasn't even pavement or ice. It was dirt. I was going to filter the dirt through my teeth to suck that vodka out of the parking lot. That's not, I'm not in control.
That's ambitious.
Manageable. I was just living for a couple of days in a car. I have no idea where I'm going to end up right now. And I'm staying at this guy's house, and I don't really know him that well, but he's bringing me to a meeting. Step 1, check. Yeah, I was there. And then step 2, I came to believe that a power greater than myself could just restore me to sanity. And I had to be, the first time I had come into AA, step 2 was really easy for me. I said, step 2, I believe in God, check. And I put God over there on the shelf and left him there. And that's unsuccessful. That's not an approach to the second step that acknowledges all of it, because coming to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity means there's a relationship with my higher power, with God. Mm-hmm. I have to have a relationship. And how do I encourage and have that relationship? It can't be God on a shelf. It has to be God in my heart. It has to be a God that not only can I practice the ritual of written down prayers, but has to be a God that I can sit down and have a conversation with. Much like when we started this meeting, I started it with a prayer, and it wasn't a prayer that was written anywhere. It's a prayer that came out of my honest desire to be in connection with and relationship with God and with the program and with my recovery. Those were all critical elements of a second step that's worked for me. And then I had to make a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand him. So just being able to go through these steps the first time imperfectly and allowing myself the fact that I'm imperfect. And let me back up one moment to that second step, because one of the things I really had to fight was not feeling worthy. Like, I'm just a piece of shit. I'm not worthy enough for God to be interested in me, to work to try to make my life manageable. And so trying to have a relationship with God in the beginning, again, I didn't have that feeling of worthiness. It was safe to put God over on the shelf. But when I bring God into my person, into my heart, I have to humbly ask for forgiveness. I have to come and say, I want to be worthy. I pray that I'm worthy. And there's only one thing that can restore that worthiness to me, and that's my relationship with God. And so starting to feel self-worth and value is incredibly important, because when we come in, and when I came in and when I came back in, my self-worth was devastated. I was definitely at the bottom. And, I wasn't at the point where I had a pistol to my head, but I may as well had the bottle to my head. It was going to kill me just as dead, right? Dead is dead, whether it's a bullet or it's a bottle of vodka. And, then I had to work through all of these, and there was times it was incredibly hard, and I was struggling, and I was in emotional pain. And I learned through the program, and by listening to people share. There was a lady that she came on, and she was talking about some of her struggle, talking about how she was suffering. And she said, what's important is for me to be able to shift my perspective so that I can be grateful for my suffering. Because if I'm not grateful for my suffering, then I'm going to be resentful about it. And that resentment is going to lead me back to a drink. So being able to work through that feeling of shame and unworthiness, and then allowing myself to suffer and to realize, yes, okay, I can learn from this suffering too. I know how to physically suffer, but I'm not very good at that emotional, mental suffering. Grateful for my suffering so that I can come closer to God. And this is actually something that I was in a conversation with somebody the other day, and it came out. God has the ability to allow us to perfectly understand him, but he doesn't. So that we must struggle to try to understand him. It is in our struggle and with our willingness to engage in this struggle that we increase our relationship with God.
I am a firm believer. I shared it in my last share that I did in our meeting last week. Is like, I think the obstacles are putting away with quote unquote struggles to bring us closer to God if we are really believing. And not just foxhole praying. Let me off this one time. I promise I will stop drinking. But no, I am a firm believer that paradigm shift, that you're not deserving of something, but God puts things in your way to draw you closer to him. And that's I've definitely changed my thinking a long time ago, brother. And it sounds like you have too.
Yeah. And so, what are the keys that unlock sobriety? This is something that I spent a lot of time pondering. And I don't think it's one thing individually, because it starts.
Abstinence doesn't create. You are physically sober, but you're a dry drunk. Talk to Doug McQuarrie. He was sober for years and having a disastrous life.
First, before I got to the we in the first word of the first step, we admitted, I had to make a decision. There cannot be a we without an I. I had to make a decision that I was willing to do whatever it took to get what was offered. All right. So I had to make that decision. In order to make that decision, I had to be willing, and I had to be humble. I had to humbly become willing to admit that I was powerless over alcohol. And only then could I become part of the we, to come into the program. And so that shift of humility and willingness brought me in with the ability to examine my suffering and say, okay, how am I going to shift my perspective and be grateful for it? And the shift that happened is very much allowing that struggle to bring me closer to God, and that is what makes me grateful. It's almost as a precursor. I should have said this a while back, because AA is a spiritual program. It's not a religious program. Mm-hmm. So I'm very comfortable coming in and calling my higher power God, but that doesn't mean that I have any judgment or that I'm trying to sell my higher power off on anyone else. I just refer to my higher power in my language. And if someone else comes in and they say that tree over there is my higher power, or that dog over there is my higher power, or this group of drunks is my higher power, God bless you. Glad you're here. Keep coming. It's keep coming. So I don't have any judgment about that. But it is important to be clear, because it is not uncommon for people to be coming in to be extremely resistant to the idea of using the word God at all.
It's overplayed. I've been in this thing for almost 14 years. It's just, to me, it's an inert conversation. It's just semantical in a fact that they want to be resistant about something.
And the best thing I can do
is drives me crazy, dude.
Read the chapter to the agnostics in the big book.
Absolutely.
Conversation over. And,
absolutely.
I don't need to. It's not a debate.
It's like the last hill to die on or something. It's really, I don't get it.
Yeah. So That's the approach that I had coming back into AA, willing to really work. And then in conjunction with this, I joined a union. I started working on the same ships I was providing security for. Things in my life started improving tremendously. I love my job. Now I'm a merchant mariner. I drive a ship just like the one that hit the bridge in Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't hit a bridge yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I said it earlier, it's one of the ironies of my life. I didn't quit in Buds because I didn't want to work on a ship. I started working on ships and I loved it so much. I worked super hard to knock down all the obstacles to get here. And now I have a job that I love, and I'm grateful for that. People ask me, why do I love it? I say, well, because I'm in the middle of the ocean and I wake up and I have a cup of coffee and my office looks like the bridge of a ship. And I look around and I'm just astounded.
And you send us pictures when you're underway.
By the beauty of God's beauty around me. Yeah, I'll definitely send pictures when I'm underway.
You have?
Yeah.
Well, I know you like to gloat about your children. I want to hear about their success and how they're following, and because it's important to you. And I see your face lighting up, that what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Yeah, and so they must have just seen, because I never tried to push this idea on anybody, but I've loved working on ships the entire time since 2014, and they've seen that. And they both ended up going to Maine Maritime Academy. They're both going to graduate in May. They're both going to have their third mate's license. They're both going to be working on probably the same ships that I am, because they're in the same union as I am, and they're going to be working on the same Maersk ships, because I think it's just amazing. Yeah, they're following in my path.
There's no consequences in AA, brother. You know that.
Yeah.
How's everything going now, though? How's things? I know you're still not living at home, but you're close to your kids. How's the relationship with your wife? How does it play into your sobriety? And what does the outlook look like for you guys?
So, I'm not going to go into the outlook, only because
not the outlook, but
expectations. As soon all I have to do is start making plans, and God's going to laugh at me.
Right. I apologize.
And it's not always smooth. It's not easy. I worked for a long time trying to crawl back through my own front door, and for over 2 years, I wasn't even able to live on this property. I didn't, and I'm back on the property now. And, really what I want to do is I want to reconcile a healthy relationship with Amy, and what that looks like, I don't know. I don't even want to speculate, because I want it to be healthy. And I think that's an achievable goal. And what does that look like? We'll see. We'll see.
Fair enough.
And how do I get there? The way that I get anything done in this program is by sticking with it, is by constantly, in that 11th step, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out, trying to get myself out of the driver's seat of the bus called life. Because as soon as I'm in the driver's seat, if you're on the bus, get off, because I'm going to drive us off a cliff. If I can get out of that driver's seat and let God take the wheel, that gives me the ability to be the passenger. That gives me the ability to stick a hand out for someone who needs help and bring them onto the bus. It gives me the ability to appreciate where God wants to take me versus where I want to take me. As we trudge this road to happy destiny, right? Trudge means to move slowly forward, or to move forward slowly under a heavy burden. And at times it's been a heavy burden. And at times when I look ahead and I see the distance I have to travel, I can be discouraged. But if I pause and turn around and look back from where I came from, I can find gratitude, like, wow, I'm here today. I'm not where I was then. And yeah, there's still more ahead of me, but rather than be resentful about how difficult it is and the hills and the difficulty and falling down, I can be grateful for the fact that I am here where I am. And when I do fall down, there's going to be a brother with a hand out to help me.
And I'll segue with that too. So, you work in a good program, and then you found SEALs in Recovery. What has SEALs in Recovery done for you as far as being part of our group, helping out other SEALs, and how did it affect your recovery once you found this group?
It's amazing, because it's the brotherhood. Long live the brotherhood. And here we are, and it's a group where we can come into the group and talk a lot of shit to each other and give each other a hard time, and it's done with love. And I definitely appreciate coming into the group and being able to share some cool guy fucking wisdom and sounding like I really got my shit together. And that is not always the case. And there are times when I can come in and I can just be, dudes, I am hurt right now. I don't have anything cool to say. All I can say is I'm a hot mess and I'm struggling. And, the reaction, the response that I get to that is more important to me than the response that I get when I say something that sounds really cool. Because what there is there's unconditional support. And I know that if I got in a serious jam, that there's some guys that would get on a plane and come up here and do what they had to do.
100%.
100%.
I know you would do that for any guy in that room.
100%. Yep. Yeah. And it's a common language. We have a common language. And that's one thing that was hard for me in the regular AA programs, is trying to relate words I use and experiences that we've all gone through that we can relate to aren't transparent. I can't talk about much of what I did unless I'm in a group of SEALs in recovery. And then that level of honesty just got a whole lot deeper.
Yeah, and this community is so small, you can't really bullshit anybody either. And that's an interesting thing is, I had a good program going, continuous sobriety, and then we started the SEALs in recovery, and it unlocked a whole bunch of stuff that I couldn't share with anybody.
Yeah.
It definitely cleaned that channel out. So that's a good thing.
We're only as sick as our sickest, darkest secret that we've never wanted to share. And, it provides the space to be able to air that out and bring the light to it, because it's our alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful, and it's going to use any tool it can to get us to drink again. And anything we want to leave in the darkness, that darkness is a weapon against us. And
it's interesting you say that. And I got a call from, we're hitting the mainstream in spec war with being visible, and I got a call from a doctor, one of the psychologists out at the Group 1 out there, and she's talking about a guy that's going to come in and potentially come in. He's ADSEP. He popped on a urinalysis and this and that. And she said, "Is that a problem?" I said, "No, we have guys from class 51 to the 300s. We have guys that have gotten their birds that got kicked out for drugs. We've got guys that have lost their birds. We've got guys that have had every kind of problem." Him coming into this group there's nothing he could say, I'm pretty sure, that somebody hasn't heard in our group that hasn't not dealt with what he's dealing with, which is a testament to our group and what it could give to somebody coming in the group, as far as moving the chains, moving along, moving down a track, and what they have to face. And they don't have to face it alone, because there's symmetry in a group with folks that have endured the same thing. I mean, you think about it, class 51 to the 300s, every conflict, every coast, every command. It's the corporate knowledge is amazing. That's intact on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So anything else you want to talk about, or?
Man, I'm damn near talked out. That was a marathon.
No, perfect. It's perfect. I listen to podcasts all the time, and I listen to them all the time. And if it's a long one, I'll break it up into 2 days. I mean, I think people say, what kind of time frame should you put on it? There is no time frame. I want people to hear people's stories, and that's important. And text to the stories and depth to their stories. And you can't do it in 30 minutes or 45 minutes. There's no way.
And just the knowledge and the realization that it's a journey with no destination.
True. True. All right, Gordo. Bright spot always in our Wednesday meeting. I don't get to the Thursday one.
I've been going to that to support it. It's all in getting rolling.
I started and flew out there. I did enough. He's going to have to build his. I mean, Dan says it. Doug says it. I say it. We sat in our meeting for months with 3 guys, and we grew it. So you have to get the word out. I thank you so much. Your story is an amazing one. All the stuff you did is just amazing. You should write a book. I'm sure you've been told that before. But I mean, just the sailing stuff alone, and buying houses in Hawaii and farming. I mean, it's amazing. But I'm thankful for your transparency and honesty, brother. I really am. It's going to touch a lot of people's hearts. I could assure you that.
I'm grateful. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I will see you on Wednesday.
You know it.
Bye-bye.